everyone, welcome. I'm joined by K Kurian, CEO of Wipro Limited. Mr. Kurian, thank you very much for speaking with us. So very broadly, let me ask you before I come to some specifics, what devices do you carry? Or where? More
it's amazing. You know, my wife keeps saying that what I have at home is a device graveyard.
Okay.
Because almost every new device that comes into the market, I experiment with.
Right.
I've connected my home about 2 years ago, and my home is completely digitally enabled.
Okay.
I had to disconnect it recently because what happened was that my son decided that he's going to create a hack attack from outside. And when my wife started walking into rooms, lights started going off. So I quickly realized that I had to put in security as part of this. But fundamentally, I love technology. And, you know, I use a Fitbit. I've got a Google Glass. I've got all kinds of things running.
Right. And it's interesting you said, I mean, so two things come out of this, right? So one is your desire for new things, the fact that those new things also expire in some ways very quickly. You talked about the graveyard. And the second aspect, which may be not so important today, but is generally important in IT security. So let me pick on the first one, right? So what are your consumers telling you today, and what's making them change fast, and what are they responding to?
So, you know, if you look at our customers, there are two sets of customers. There are today, I mean, you heard the session before where 40% of capital expenditure is going to be technology of some form. The funny thing is that 40% that people are buying are not necessarily the CIOs. So what's happening is in many organizations, the CIO's role is slowly getting relegated to run. And the job of the CIOs, and especially our job as an organization, is to make sure the CIOs remain relevant. At the end of the day, they're our biggest buyers. They've been our biggest buyers. And it's important for us to train them to be relevant for the future. Yet, we have to address a completely new segment out there. The problem with the new segment is it requires very different skill sets. It requires very different speed. It's not something that you can do using your current organizational model. So in a way, there are two ends of the spectrum that we are handling. One which is built for speed, and the other one which is built for scale. For us, an organization with size of ours, and it's true for every large organization, innovation comes very hard for large organizations. It's much easier to do in a smaller organization. So once you build it for speed, you have to be low on headcount, quick in terms of response, and the ability to integrate and understand the customer's problem is a very, very key component of the second.
Right.
Which means understanding the business context of what you do is very important.
Right. So give me an illustration of what is changing or has changed on your customer's front, perhaps with his consumers, which is causing you or maybe exposing a gap in your learning or your skilling.
So I can give you hundreds of examples, but let me give you one simple example that I talk about every day. A couple of years ago, a customer of ours came to us and said, you know what, if I look at my enterprise, between operations and technology, I have today about 700 people handling the most basic function that runs in every enterprise, which is travel. So the question that was thrown to us was that, hey, listen, there are secretaries, there is travel department, there are external vendors, everybody's working on this. So is there a way by which we can fundamentally look at this process and see how you can disintermediate it? So about a year ago, we started developing a product that could do this. So now we have come up with a product where fundamentally, if you're sitting in Bombay today and you want to go to Bangalore, on your mobile phone, it's an app. You press the app and you put your schedule on your calendar, assuming you have to be in Brigade Road in Bangalore by 2 o'clock in the afternoon. It'll tell you specifically which flights you should take based upon the traffic in Bangalore.
That's very important.
Historical traffic. Then it will tell you, based upon the flights, if you got linked back to a particular airline, that airline will only show up in your schedule, because what will happen is you have no choice because that's your corporate travel. The minute you press a button, your ticket gets booked. Your boarding pass gets sent to you based upon the seat that you've selected at the time of check-in. And then what happens is that your boarding pass is on your phone. So that's the level of integration that you have that sits in these kind of applications. This came out of a customer idea. Now we are implementing it. We've implemented it in 3 customers already. We're implementing it within Wipro. In Wipro, we have 700 people doing travel. That number will come down to 20. just an example of how things can completely change when you use location, mobility, and context to really take information and use it effectively.
Right, and since you mentioned headcount, I know you keep sort of being blasted with headcount questions, but there is a larger headcount issue going forward, right? And you've talked about that companies will have no choice if they have to meet the needs of the digital future to reduce headcount and increase productivity very sharply. Right? And that's a different thing from saying that I'm having a year-on-year pressure to manage headcount. Where do you see this going then?
I think it's going to be tough given the social context. It's easy to do using technology. It's tougher given the social context in mind. See, we have, as an industry, we have evolved by adding headcount. We've got a whole bunch of middle managers and senior managers who've seen that model. Once you see something happening for 20 years, you believe that's the only reality, right? That's the problem. So I think it's going to be the biggest problem that we're going to have in that area is going to be internal change management rather than external change management.
So you're also being quite self-critical of your middle management, and I'm assuming middle managements of most companies
it's of the industries.
Yeah,
I think that's true. It's not middle management by itself, and I want to define middle management very clearly. There is middle management that really adds to technology, and I think that's fabulous to have. We absolutely need those guys, and those are people that we really treasure. There are yet other people who just manage people. And that's the game that you don't want in the future. Because having a person who sits as a router, routing traffic from one end to the other, communicating upwards and managing downwards, is not a function that you require long term. So that's the problem that you have. So it's a very different kind of an area. That particular skill set is not going to be required anymore.
So let me ask you as a sort of concluding question, as you look ahead, not too far ahead, but ahead, in again the context of digital future, working with corporations who are increasingly becoming digital, consumers who are demanding more digital services, what are your 2 or 3 key challenges and also the opportunities that flow?
So I think the opportunities are pretty clear. I think there's a huge opportunity out there. The opportunity would be really around building solutions for scale. It's a very different thing about building people for scale. Now you've got to build solutions for scale. So which means that the partner ecosystem that we work with is going to be very different from the partner ecosystem that we were used to in the past. That's the first big opportunity the way I see it. The challenge the way I see it is going to be how do we break up the organization into 2, literally 2. One that runs fast and worries about growth. The other one that manages growth and worries about costs. So it's a different approach altogether. And the last piece, which I think is an opportunity and a threat, is that while we are trying to figure out the first 2, our competitors are not sitting by waiting for us to figure it out. They are attacking us every day. And how do we manage competition given the customer base that we have? If you give up customer base today, tomorrow you're finished. That's the reality.
So last question, if I can append to that, who is your customer going forward? I mean, your customers today are fairly well defined, but even in a digital world or an increasingly digital world, is that going to change?
I think the CIO is going to remain a customer. It's going to remain an important customer. The other segments, the CEO, the CMO, the CFO are going to become critical for us. So there is going to be a movement out. For the CIO, the only example that I would give is if you go back to 1929, and if you go back to just the automobile industry. In the automobile industry, there used to be a role that was called the head of utilities. In Ford Motor Company in 1929, the second most powerful guy in the Ford Motor Company was the head of utilities. Because Ford ran the largest tire shop, the largest glass shop, the largest steel plant in the world. And if you did not have utilities, you were dead in all this. Right now, you go back to Ford Motor Company and ask them, who's your head of utilities? Chances are that nobody will know about that guy. So very quickly, roles depending upon complexity gets relegated when complexity itself is removed. And the world of the future is going to be about simplification and removing complexity. So the CIO's role has to completely morph into becoming an integration officer rather than just remaining a technology guy or an information guy. I think that's the challenge for them.
And that's a good note to end on, maybe either depending on how optimistic or otherwise you see it.
Exactly.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.